Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. We are going to be talking about medicine, motherhood, and mayhem, and I'm going to be sharing some leadership lessons that I've learned from my life. So you guys may have seen me on The Real Housewives. I also did a brief stint as a stand-up comedian, but I went back to my day job, which is putting people to sleep. You may also know me from social media, where I have a presence on Instagram and TikTok, and I like to share little snippets from my life. But today, I hope to give you a behind-the-scenes look at my life and how I've arrived here, because I think sometimes what you see on the exterior doesn't necessarily show what's on the interior and how somebody got to be where they are. So I was raised mostly by my grandparents in China. I'm actually from a city in northern China bordering Russia called Harbin. It's known for being freezing, like sub-zero temperatures from October to April, and famous for an ice sculpture festival that we have. My parents were students and came to America on student visas, which was very common back then in the 80s. And I was raised largely by my grandparents. And then when I was 6 years old, I got put on a plane from Beijing to JFK by myself because my grandparents couldn't afford to and they didn't have the visas to come. So there was a flight attendant who gave me a lot of snacks, and I landed at JFK Airport and met my parents, whom I had not seen in several years and quite frankly didn't know. This was, I think, one of those school pictures from first or second grade. This was shortly after I arrived in America, not speaking a lick of English. The kids were mean, as kids can be. I was called a variety of names, which were not very original. As it turns out, bullies are not very original with their remarks. I do want to point out that even as a first or second grader, I did have some fashion sense. I want you to know that my favorite color has always been pink and that I have always accessorized. I mean, you see this gold chain, I don't know what, I mean, this is like 1990, you know, so, and then the bows in my hair. I mean, you got to give it up for the fashion here. I grew up only being praised for being obedient and smart, or not even smart, but just getting good grades, right? If I came home with a 98 on a math test, my father would take the paper and say, "What did you miss? How could you miss that question? I'm going to give you 5 extra pages of questions like that so that next time you see a question like that, you won't miss it." Perfection was the goal. And not only was it the goal, it was the standard. Like anything less than perfection in my house was not tolerated. And it gave me the acute sense that growing up as a child and in early adulthood, that my worth was tied to my achievement and how many accolades I had and what my resume said. And I think I didn't focus on some of the inner parts of my self-worth, like curiosity, creativity, spontaneity. So I ended up going to college at the age of 15 because I got into a advanced talented and gifted program that exists in Texas. So when I graduated from Cornell, in this picture, I was 19 years old. I couldn't even party in college. People talk about, you know, their college experience, going to frat parties or, you know, partying, you know, drinking, things like that. I couldn't. I was 19 when I graduated. I proceeded immediately to medical school, not taking a gap year, and I did research every summer while I was at Cornell because that's what I was told I needed to do in order to get into medical school. So I graduated from medical school at the age of 23, went to residency at UCSF, which is one of the top programs, and everything just felt like I was on a high-speed train. You know, in Japan, they have that high-speed train that gets you to the major cities. That's how I felt my entire life. So the first lesson that I want to share with you all is that the joy is in the journey and not in the destination. Several years ago, I had a good friend who invited me to the Kentucky Derby. Now, I don't know anything about horses, horse racing, none of that, but I knew that you were supposed to wear a really big hat and it was supposed to coordinate with your outfit. So I took it as a fashion opportunity to go to the Kentucky Derby. And of course, they had all the race horses there. And I turned to my friend and I was like, what's that thing on its face? Why did the horses wear the mask thing? I thought that it was to match to the jockey, like, color. Seriously. And she was like, no. And I was like, oh, I know the right answer. It's aerodynamic efficiency. It decreases the drag coefficient. I think I remember this from physics class. And she was like, no. She said, they're called blinders. And they are put on the race horses so that during the race, they only can see the finish line. Like, you actually put a physical restraint on the animal so that it cannot see peripherally, so that it doesn't look away, so that it doesn't shave a millisecond off of its finish time, right? And I was sitting there, holding my mint jewel up, and I was like, oh my God, I'm that racehorse. Like, what a beautiful analogy for how I've lived my life up until this point. It was like, become a doctor, go to medical school, graduate with honors, get into the best residency program. And it's like the finish line, except the finish line kept moving every time I got to the finish line. And I never got to have any peripheral vision of doing anything outside of academic achievement. And I figured this out when I was like 35 years old, but I was like, wait, I still have lots of time. Like, yes, I have a little bit of resentment that, I learned this lesson so late in life, but I still have so much life ahead of me. And I decided then that I was going to live with more joy, that I was going to take the blinders off, and that I was not going to live the rest of my life singularly focused on a finish line. Because actually, the finish line, although wonderful, and each of these, milestones did give me happiness and joy, I feel like I didn't experience the full joy journey because I didn't experience the path and not just the finish line. So people often ask me how I met my husband, and I would love to say, oh, we met in school or we met at church. Those would be much more acceptable answers. We met at a bar. In fact, I'm not gonna lie to you, it wasn't a bar, it was a club. It was like, like bouncer, velvet rope, like yes. In my defense, I was celebrating almost graduating from medical school. So I was 23 years old. It was the month of med school graduation. It was post-match day, which is like, the culmination of medical school where you find out where you'll be attending residency. So I was in full senioritis mode, and that's when we met. Spoiler alert, we ended up getting married. So you can meet someone in a club and actually have a successful marriage, although it's not how I would recommend meeting your spouse. And what's the next thing after you get married, right? All the Chinese aunties at church were like, oh, when are you gonna have kids? All this kind of thing. And I was approaching the deadline, right? Like the eggs are getting older, right? And the fact of the matter is we had been trying for over a year and nothing was happening. And I was freaking out because I understood science. I could tell you about the luteal and follicular phases of a woman's menstrual cycle and draw you the whole chart of, progesterone, estrogen, LH, all this stuff, and nothing was happening. And generally in my life, whatever I did, I got the thing that I needed to get. And I did not realize that getting pregnant would be so hard because in my mind, it should be easy. I struggled with infertility. I had a terrible miscarriage while I was in the operating room at work. Something felt awry. And the first thought that I had was, oh no, they're gonna be mad at me if I need to, go to the board runner and tell them I'm not feeling well and I need to go home, right? Like that, the first thought was I'm gonna get in trouble with work, not, I'm actively having a miscarriage right now. So after several rounds of fertility treatments, I finally got pregnant with twins. My best friend says that, I'm an overachiever, so of course I would have twins instead of just one. But despite that being a blessing, I had a very complicated pregnancy. I gained like 70 pounds in 8 months, which is crazy considering I started out at like 100. And then I was on bed rest for 6 weeks. So at 30 weeks, I got put on modified bed rest. So I was allowed to get up to eat, use the restroom and shower, and take this picture. And then the rest of the time I was in bed. And the thing about me is that I'm very active. I do a lot of things. So putting me on bed rest is probably one of the meanest things like that you could ever do to me. You know, I was like constricted to the bed. I was reading, watching TV. I tried to learn to code. I don't know why. I like went on like a language course and tried to learn French. So, you know, like I needed something to do to stimulate my brain. But luckily I kept the girls in and they were born. I call this mini mice. The lesson that I learned from this experience is that you cannot control everything, much to my chagrin. I chose to be an anesthesiologist largely because I love to control things, right? I mean, what gives you more control than being an anesthesiologist? I literally put people to sleep, control their blood pressure, control their heart rate, control everything. And then when the surgery's done, presto magico, I wake them up. Like it's a magic trick every day that I do in the operating room, and I love it. But with the whole pregnancy thing, I really had to learn to let go of control because it was something that I couldn't actually control, and I had to like believe in my faith and believe that this was going to happen. And it really taught me a lot because my therapist always says that happiness equals reality minus expectations. And because I felt the need to be in control of everything, I had very high expectations all the time because how could I not after all the mental gymnastics that I had done? And she said, but you can't control reality. You can only control your expectations. So if you could learn to try to not be in control all the time and lower your expectations, you would give more of a chance for this equation to be positive rather than negative. And it really, I marinated on that for a little bit and it really hit home for me. The next lesson that I'll share with you, I'm not going to read this to you, but my friend Deandra was on The Real Housewives of Dallas. And what happens is at the end of each season, they ask the current members, the current cast, if they have any friends that want to join. It's kind of like a sorority. You're always recruiting, right? You need fresh blood. And I mean, she asked me year after year. This was the third year she asked me. And every year I would say no. In fact, I think I said, are you smoking crack? Is what I told her, right? Like, I was a full-time academic anesthesiologist with twin toddlers. Like, where did Real Housewife come in? Like, I don't even understand why you're asking me. Long story short, I finally gave in. I know. They were like, but then you did it. And I'm like, yes, I know. Trust me, I remember. It wasn't what I thought it would be, but it brought so much opportunity to my life, and I'm so glad that I did the show because I think representation really matters. And it's not just about visibility. It's about possibility because you cannot be what you don't see. And I did not join Housewives to be this icon of representation for the Asian American community. I was just trying to have a good time. But then all this stuff came out, and this was right around COVID when, you know, our people were having some difficulties. There's a lot on the news at that time. And I sort of got thrust into this position of being a spokesperson for the AAPI community. And I was like, oh, okay, if that's what it is, then that's what it is. You know, it was kind of like, I was like, no. And then somebody's like pushing me and I'm like, okay, here I am. But I'm so grateful for that opportunity because it actually allowed me to find my voice. Prior to Real Housewives, I was a conflict avoider. If I didn't like someone, I would just ghost them. Like, maybe it's not nice, you know, but I was not into like face-to-face real conflict. And Housewives kind of like made me do it. And then I kind of learned my voice because of it. It's so odd how things work. So lesson 3 is don't be afraid to take a detour. I really was afraid that when I joined Real Housewives that it would ruin my medical career, right, which I had worked my entire life for, that no one would ever take me seriously as a board-certified anesthesiologist who runs clinical trials and teaches, residents and medical students. I'm not going to join this show, this one little thing, and have it ruin my entire career. But in fact, it didn't. And it gave me a platform to talk about issues that are important to me, like gender equity, AAPI representation, all of these things that I'm passionate about. So hopefully I've given you a little glimpse behind the scenes of my life and not just what the Instagram reel shows. And my plea to all of you is to try to live your lives with more joy. I know that in the current landscape that we're all dealing with a lot of adversity. You turn on the news and it's almost all negative. And sometimes you sit down and you think, how can I live with joy when the times are so fraught with lack of connection and people mistreating each other and bad things happening in the world? But there always is a silver lining. I always say that my 3 joy practices are gratitude, laughter, and connection. Trying to make a real connection with someone and trying every day to find something funny. Usually, even in bad times, there's something funny. And for one moment in time, if we can laugh together at something, it's unifying. It reminds us that perhaps we're more alike than we are different. So my hope to you is that you'll all live your lives with a little bit more joy. And being that I am an influencer, I would like to invite you to make some content with me. So I'm going to say, what are we going to live with more of? And then you guys all say joy. And then I post that on Instagram. This is how content creation works. People are like, oh my God, you're a content creator. I could never. And I'm like, no, you can. Trust me. It's not that hard. Okay, here we go.